Hey, welcome to another Worship Tech Makeover video. I'm Adam, the lead tech coach for Worship Ministry School, and I want to share with you just some things that we had done at New Creation Church with our Accelerator Pro student, Jonathan. This is in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. So Jonathan, like I said, is an Accelerator Pro student in Worship Ministry School. So we've been working together with this Google document that we call a growth plan, and we use this to share dreams, to document some action items, to share links. This is just a space for us to collaborate with our students. So in that document, Jonathan expressed he wanted to really nail down equipping the volunteers, creating some standard operating procedures. But before you create all those standard operating procedures, the first step is to optimize those systems and workflows. So audio, lighting, visual, all those things needed to be optimized before we could really optimize all those standard operating procedures. So they shared with us a video of their space describing the equipment that they had, what issues they were having, and what they actually wanted it to be like. So we started dreaming up them solutions, and we gave Jonathan and his team a lot of things that they could do ahead of time before we actually arrived to the church in person, so that we could be most efficient with the things that we actually needed to do on site. I'm really grateful for Jonathan and his team. They're a blast to work with, and they did all of their homework so that we really could optimize the time that we had in person together at the church. Luke, another coach for Worship Ministry School, joined me on this trip, and we were able to accomplish a lot of things together. So here is what we did. Number one, we made a plan. We were able to optimize the console configuration using Google Sheets. They had done a lot of work ahead of time filling this out, but what we really did to optimize the console is really clean up and make sure that it was being used the best way possible. And we documented all of these things because there's a lot of places that audio is coming from and going to. So we started with our fader number or channel number, and then we've got our input, the actual instrument or signal coming in. We've got what microphone can be used. And then we've got the floor pocket, actually where it's being plugged in on stage. And then it comes to a head amp and it's going to a splitter. And then you've got your waves output, and then you've got your waves input. So there are a lot of places that routing needed to be considered. And we used this sheet a lot as we were making sure that all of our I's were dotted and T's were crossed in actually optimizing and routing the console that they had, a Yamaha MC7L. We actually really needed this as we were optimizing their console because something would get unpatched or we would notice that something's not working. We were able to check, is it plugged into the right floor pocket? Is it going into the right head amp? Is it going to waves out on the right slot? Is it coming back in on the right slot? And we were really able to use this a lot as we were figuring things out. The console they had is a Yamaha M7CL, so it's a bit older, a bit odd to work with compared to newer consoles where you just have a big I/O patch grid. So this is a really helpful tool that we were able to use to make the most of our time.
Before we continue on with the video, a quick word from our sponsor, the Worship Ministry School Accelerator Program. You may not know this, but in addition to all the YouTube content we're creating here at Churchfront, we also partner with local church worship and production ministries to help them hit their ministry goals. Over the past 4 years, we've worked personally with hundreds of worship ministries around the globe. We've helped churches navigate upgrading their worship tech, building better systems to grow their team of volunteers, as well as address any knowledge or skill gaps required for modern day worship ministry. When you join the Accelerator program, you get access to our entire library of online, on-demand courses, and you get unlimited access to our team of Churchfront coaches. To learn more about joining the program, click the link below this video to apply and schedule your free strategy session today. Now let's get back to the video.
In that console, there are 3 I/O slots. One of them had to be used for Avioms, for in-ears, and the other 2 were Waves cards, but they only had 16 channels of in and out. So we were able to cascade those 2 and give us 32 channels into the Waves SuperRack setup that they have. After we made a plan and optimized the console layout and made sure that audio was passing to all the right places, we worked on gain structure. And there are so many places that there were gain structure issues within this system. And they were all slight issues on their own, but they really added up to some major issues. So the first place is the microphone. The wireless RF, the transmitter had a gain structure on it of how much you can put into the microphone before it starts clipping, or if it's too low and then you're raising the noise floor somewhere else. Then the receiver had a spot that you could set the gain. After that, it hit the console preamp, another spot you can have gain, and then on the channels, the compressors being used on the console itself had really compressed and then a lot of makeup gain. After that, it went to Waves SuperRack, where the input of the SuperRack was cranked, processing happened, and then there was more gain after the Waves SuperRack output. And then you got your fader placement of all your individual channels, your master output, and then it goes to the amplifier. So I started with the actual sound system. I just cleared the console channel that I was using of any processing. I cleared the output, the master out of the console of any processing. I played some familiar tracks and I set it so that when the master fader is a little bit below unity and the channel fader was an appropriate spot, the gain coming into that specific channel was at an appropriate spot, that the amplifiers were then set to an appropriate spot. So instead of having the amplifiers cranked and then sending low signal to the amplifiers and then having lots of noise in the system, we were able to clean up the system in a ton of places. And in a testament to what just doing proper gain structure can do, I want to quote one of the vocalists that came for the rehearsal. So a little backstory on how we got to the rehearsal. All we had done was optimize the console and then done tuning of the room and proper gain structure. And then at rehearsal, we were starting with just recording the rehearsal so that we could do some virtual sound check later. So we're at rehearsal, we're just starting it, and someone says, wow, I can actually hear what's happening in my ears. Everything is so clear. What did you do? And I said, I haven't started processing anything yet. The only thing I've done is make sure that gain structure was set properly. So I feel like I address this in every single one of these videos, but mastering the basic of having this done right is going to get you really far before you even start processing your audio. Regardless of what type of console you have, you can just start with getting the proper gain structure throughout your entire system. It's going to make a big difference. Like I said, one of the things that we worked on was virtual soundcheck. This is really important because Jonathan wanted his team to be able to practice mixing and be able to fix issues and do all of that without there being an actual band on stage. So this is a really helpful tool as far as learning the console, practicing mixing, getting some presets dialed in. So we used Ableton to record the multi-tracks and play them back. And then we used Waves SuperRack, the AB input flip specifically on Waves SuperRack to flip between console inputs and then the Ableton inputs. So this is a really helpful tool, especially because we're able to use a Streamdeck to hit AB flip, and that triggers going from live inputs to virtual soundcheck inputs. So within a second, you can go from recording a rehearsal to playing it back, which is also a really helpful tool for mixing in-ears. The musicians play a full song or even half of a song, and then you play back what they had just done, and they can adjust their in-ears without having to play their instrument at the same time. They can just focus on getting their mix dialed in. So it really optimizes your rehearsal or your sound check time as well. Not only did we do the virtual sound check input flip through Waves, we also added a lot of processing through the Waves server rack. Previously, Jonathan was just using Waves Tune for vocal tuning to tighten up all of their vocalists on stage, but he already had the Waves SuperRack and some plugins, so why not move some more of the processing to the actual Waves server instead of using the console configuration of the comps and EQs, etc. One of the reasons that we also did this is because Jonathan plans to upgrade to a Waves LV1 mixing system, so this will get his volunteers and audio engineers a chance to really practice using that workflow and those plugins to do all the audio processing instead of the processing on the console itself. So some of the plugins that we bought, number one, 100% is the F6 Dynamic EQ. Dynamic EQ has a little bit more precision in the frequency that you are deciding to either boost or compress separately. It's just a really awesome tone shaping tool that we're able to use. So when the kick drum hits, we could push a little bit more of the low end or more of the snap as the input actually hits the F6. Same thing with vocals. We could use it as a de-esser or allow if someone is talking quieter for more of the low end to come through, or if they're pushing really hard and they hit that 1 to 2K harshness, we can pull that out. But then if they're singing softer, you get those frequencies back and it sounds more natural to their voice. We used a tool called Torque as well as Smack Attack. So those are awesome drum processing tools for being able to change the fundamental frequency of the toms and the snare or even the kick. So you can tune your snare higher and it feels good to play rolls. It's not feeling like it's loose, but then in the house, you get that nice, deep, punchy snare. We use Smack Attack to adjust the transient response of the drums. So if you hit the snare and you're not getting quite the attack or the smack that you want out of it, you can push that. You also can adjust the tail of the instrument. So if you're hitting a rack tom and you want to make the sustain shorter so that it's not going out as far, you can do that. So those tools really made a huge difference on the drums. And we were already using Waves Tune, and then we used Vocal Rider, not only for vocals, but also the snare, just to keep it in a spot where you could hear it cut through the mix, but it wasn't going to get lost, and it wasn't going to overtake the mix either. Then Vocal Rider was used on the pastor microphone, so throughout the entire service, if he was getting louder, it would pull it down without changing the tone, and then if he was speaking quieter, it would push the volume up. Just imagine someone that's listening to a specific input and they're just moving the fader based on what is happening in the room, but it's not you actually doing it. It's a virtual little person adjusting the fader as needed throughout the service. So we also used Waves SuperRack to do processing on the broadcast matrix. The broadcast matrix was just a left-right main mix, and the only thing that we had changed from that was adding room mics and then, adjusting the actual room mix to make some improvements. So the main broadcast mix of just main mix plus room mics went into a Waves SuperRack channel, and then we were able to add a limiter and really make sure, as well as a compressor, and then make sure that the volume of the broadcast mix was to industry standards so that anyone watching on their phone or their computer or their TV would be able to clearly hear what is happening throughout the service. We also replaced the drum heads and tuned them to really make sure that the source that we're sending to our mix was as good as it could be. And in that same vein, we had a stage amp, or rather a understage guitar amp. So the guitar amp was underneath of the stage with a microphone on it. It was not easy to access to make sure that the microphone was placed properly, and also being under the stage, you could only hear the low frequencies. So if the guitar was turned down in the house, you would still hear all of those low, muffly guitar sounds coming from underneath of the stage, and it did not help what you were trying to do as far as create a clean mix. So we were able to remove that amp because the people that played guitar were using something like a Line 6 Pod Go or a HX Stomp, and those have amplifier modelers in them that sound great. So we just moved those from coming out of the HX Stomp or out of the Line 6 Pod Go into an amplifier, and then changed it to 1/4 inch or XLR direct outputs and dialed in some amps on those modelers. I mentioned earlier how we had an AB input flip on a Streamdeck. We also used that Streamdeck to change the keys of the vocal tune. So Within Waves SuperRack, you can have different snapshots, and these snapshots can have different things saved to them. So we made sure that each snapshot was only changing the Waves Tune plugin, and it would just change it to the correct key. So song 1, say it was in the key of A, you hit song 1, and it pulls up that snapshot and makes sure that all the Waves Tune plugins are set to that key. You go to song 2, say this is in the key of F. All of those Waves Tune plugins are going to be set to the key of F without changing any of the other processing on those channels. So throughout the service, song 1, you hit the button, song 2, you hit the song 2 button, and you can easily make sure that the vocalists are in tune throughout the service using the correct key. We also use that Stream Deck to be able to flip between looking at the Waves SuperRack software and the multi-tracking software so that you could make sure that you're recording all of the inputs and that you can adjust anything on either Ableton or Waves SuperRack and access it quickly. A lot of the time, Luke was helping me, reading off the patch sheet, helping me patch things on the console, being on stage, but there were moments when I was just working on the soundboard myself, and Luke was focused on helping the computer graphics and lighting folks optimize their systems. So I can't speak a ton to what he had done in those things, but I know that he really cleaned up ProPresenter, helped them make a better use of macros, and made sure that their lighting scenes were configured properly, and also made sure that there was a lighting show file specifically for Sundays and then specifically for other events throughout the week. And the lighting show file for events throughout the week only had what they needed to see, and didn't give them the option to mess with things that needed to stay consistent Sunday to Sunday for services. Additionally, at that computer that was running both ProPresenter and LightKey, it would have a Stream Deck, the XL, and each page of the Stream Deck was specific to Sunday morning, Tuesday evening men's Bible study, or Wednesday evening whatever. There was different pages for different groups. So if you were on the Tuesday evening men's Bible study, you would go to the Stream Deck, you would hit the men's Bible study button, and it would take you to the page that showed you all the things that you needed to press, whether it be different scenes for we're starting, pre-Bible study lighting, to we're showing a video for the Bible study so it dims the lights, or we need to pull up ProPresenter and show some different things on the screens. Anything that you needed to operate for that Bible study was on that Stream Deck page. So kudos to Jonathan and his team for optimizing that and thinking through that workflow and making sure that people have the least amount of technology to worry about as they walk in the room and they want to do their ministry work. So Sunday came after all of these changes that we had made, and we were able to have a very smooth service. Things sounded great. The broadcast mix sounds much better than it did. The in-house mix sounds much better than it did. The musicians were happy with the sound and operation of their Avioms, and overall, I'm just really happy with all the results that we were able to accomplish. Again, with all of these things only being there a few days, we can't do everything that needed to happen. So that's where doing work ahead of time really made the most of the time that we were there. And some things that Jonathan and his team are going to work on after we have visited is making sure that the scene files are cleaned up. The M7 has a lot of scenes on it that don't need to be there. You really just need one for Sunday mornings as your master start file, one for the outside groups, and then maybe one more for a specific ministry that comes in and only needs to see certain things on their mix. There are a ton of scenes in there that just need to be deleted so it's not taking up room and space. And then one more thing that I recommended they do is add processing on the actual console itself. If anything were to happen to the M7, in a few button presses you could trigger turning on all of the compressors and EQs to the channels. So instead of having no EQ and no compression because it's being done in Waves, you'd have that on the console itself. Just easily turn on EQs and compressors so you have some processing for all of your inputs. When they started doing a more advanced broadcast, they had a second M7 in their tech booth upstairs, which is where Video World was, and no one is up there actually mixing. So one other thing I recommended is just removing that mixer from the workflow, because it takes up a lot of space in that room, and all they need is a stereo input from the M7 downstairs and the ability to control the volume to some speakers so that they can hear the broadcast mix when they're switching video cameras. I'm really proud of New Creation Church and glad to be working with them. They've put in a ton of work optimizing their systems, making sure that volunteers and other people using the space feel comfortable with the technology, and they made it as easy as possible for them. So kudos to you guys for doing all of this work. I'm excited to continue working with them. As next year they plan to purchase an LV1 system so that all of their audio processing is through that. We're going to talk through some ideas of how to optimize their front of house booth to make sure that whoever's mixing has a great mixing position and that their camera operators have enough space and positioned well. So we're going to continue to work with New Creation Church on these things. If you're interested in getting this kind of experience with having me come out to your church in person and see what you've got going on and make some changes together, you can apply for Worship Ministry School at worshipministryschool.com/apply. Let us know what you've been working on in the comments, what you liked about this video, and we'll see you next time.